The sun bled crimson across the western horizon, painting the endless expanse of red earth in shades of rust and shadow. Hot wind swept across the barren landscape, carrying with it the acrid taste of dust and sage, whistling through the weathered wooden crosses that dotted the hillside cemetery. The crude markers stood at odd angles, some already surrendering to time and weather, their inscriptions faded beyond recognition. Above, a murder of crows circled lazily, their harsh cries echoing off the canyon walls like accusations from the dead. Sarah Whitlock stood motionless beside the freshest grave, her black mourning dress a stark silhouette against the dying light. The white mourning veil she wore caught the relentless wind, whipping around her face like a restless spirit. Her hands, raw from digging in the unforgiving soil, clutched a worn Bible against her chest. The leather binding had belonged to her mother, passed down through generations of frontier women who understood that faith and grit were often the only things standing between survival and surrender in this harsh land. The grave before her was barely a day old, the disturbed earth still dark with moisture from the previous night's brief rain, a rare blessing in this drought-stricken territory. A simple wooden cross bore her husband's name, Thomas Whitlock, 1842 to 1871, taken too soon. The letters had been carved with trembling hands, each stroke a testament to grief too fresh to comprehend fully. From their position near the iron cemetery gate, the townspeople of Redemption Creek huddled in small groups, their whispers carrying on the wind like tumbleweeds. Women in calico dresses and sunbonnets clutched their shawls tighter, while men in dusty work clothes shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Sarah and the horizon as if expecting trouble to materialize from the heat shimmer. "Poor thing," murmured Mrs. Eleanor Hutchinson, the banker's wife, though her tone held more curiosity than sympathy. "But you know what they say about the Whitlocks. Thomas always did have peculiar notions about trading with them savages." "Hush now, Eleanor," replied Martha Coleman, the school marm, though she too kept her distance. "The woman's grieving. Grieving or not, she's marked now," interjected Silas Turner, the blacksmith, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't no good comes from mixing with the Comanche." Thomas learned that the hard way, and now she's got to bear the burden of his foolishness. Sarah heard their words. How could she not when the wind carried every syllable like arrows to her heart? But she remained still, her gray eyes fixed on the mound of earth that now separated her from the man who had been her entire world for the past 5 years. The emptiness in her gaze was profound, as if her soul had been buried alongside Thomas, leaving only a hollow shell to face the harsh realities of frontier widowhood. The memories crashed over her in waves, each more painful than the last. Thomas's laugh, rich and warm like honeymead. The way his calloused hands had gently braided her hair on their wedding morning. His dreams of building a proper ranch, of raising cattle and children under the vast Texas sky. All of it ended in a moment of violence on a dusty trail 10 miles north of town. The ambush had been swift and brutal. Thomas had been returning from a trading expedition to Fort Worth, his wagon loaded with supplies for the coming winter. The Apache raiders, or had they been Comanche? The survivors couldn't agree, had struck at dawn, when the light was still gray and uncertain. By the time the nearest ranchers had responded to the gunfire, it was over. They found Thomas face down in the red dirt, 3 arrows in his back, his life's blood mingling with the dust of the land he'd loved. But what the townspeople whispered about most wasn't the raid itself. Such violence was grimly common in these parts. It was the fact that Thomas had been found with Comanche trade beads in his pocket, and that his regular trading partner, a Comanche warrior, had been conspicuously absent from their usual meeting place for weeks before the attack. Suspicion and superstition ran deep in Redemption Creek, and the Whitlock name now carried the taint of association with the enemy. Sarah's fingers traced the worn pages of the Bible, finding no comfort in the familiar verses. God felt as distant as the mountains on the horizon, as silent as the grave at her feet. A sob threatened to escape, but she swallowed it down. She would not give the watching crowd the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here, not now. The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of mesquite and something else, leather and smoke, the unmistakable smell of someone who lived beyond the boundaries of civilization. Sarah's spine stiffened imperceptibly, a primitive awareness prickling at the back of her neck. She didn't turn, but she knew someone new was watching her, someone who didn't belong to the cluster of townspeople maintaining their careful distance. On a ridge overlooking the cemetery, partially hidden by a stand of juniper trees, Taza Redhawk sat motionless on his paint horse. His dark eyes, sharp as obsidian, took in the scene below with an expression that revealed nothing and everything. The proud set of his shoulders spoke of generations of warriors, while the tightness around his mouth suggested a conflict that ran deeper than the ancient enmity between his people and the whites. He wore a mix of traditional and adopted clothing, buckskin leggings beneath a cotton shirt, his long black hair held back by a beaded band that caught the last rays of sunlight. A rifle rested across his saddle, but his hand lay relaxed on his thigh, presenting no threat. Still, his very presence was enough to send a ripple of unease through the townspeople who had noticed him. "Dear Lord," gasped Mrs. Hutchinson, clutching her husband's arm. "There's one of them now, bold as brass, watching her like a hawk eyes a rabbit." "Someone should run him off," growled Jake Morrison, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Ain't decent, him being here." But no one moved. Fear, uncertainty, and the unspoken knowledge that Taza had never actually harmed anyone in town kept them rooted in place. They watched as he watched, creating a tableau of tension and grief under the darkening sky. Taza's gaze never wavered from the woman in black. He had known Thomas Whitlock, not as the townspeople thought, as mere trading partners, but as something rarer in this divided land. Friends. They had shared campfires and stories, had saved each other's lives more than once in the unforgiving wilderness. Thomas had been one of the few white men who looked at him and saw a man, not a savage. And now, Thomas was dead, killed in an ambush that Taza had warned him about, begged him to avoid. The guilt sat heavy in his chest, mixing with grief and something else, a pull toward the slender figure standing alone by the grave, abandoned by her own people in her hour of greatest need. He had seen Sarah before, always from a distance, when Thomas had spoken of her with the soft voice men use when they speak of things sacred to them. "My Sarah," Thomas had called her, stronger than she knows, braver than she believes. Now she stood solitary against the dying light, and Taza felt the weight of an unspoken promise to his dead friend. But approaching her would shatter taboos on both sides, would mark them both as outcasts in a land where belonging to a tribe, any tribe, could mean the difference between life and death. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, Sarah allowed herself one shuddering breath. The tears that had threatened all day finally spilled over, silent streams down her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away. The crowd was beginning to disperse, their morbid curiosity satisfied, their gossip fodder secured. Soon she would be truly alone with her grief and the impossible question of how to survive in this harsh land without Thomas's strength to lean on. She knelt beside the grave, her skirts pooling in the dust, and placed a trembling hand on the disturbed earth. "What do I do now?" she whispered to the silence. "How do I go on?" The wind offered no answers, only the mournful cry of a distant coyote and the rustle of sage. But as Sarah rose on unsteady legs, preparing for the lonely walk back to her empty house, she felt again that sensation of being watched. This time, she turned. The ridge was empty, or seemed to be, but there, caught on a juniper branch, fluttered a single eagle feather, a sign, perhaps, that she was not as alone as she believed. Whether that was a comfort or a new source of fear, Sarah couldn't yet say. She gathered her skirts and began the long walk home, leaving Thomas to his eternal sleep under the vast, indifferent sky of the frontier. Behind her, hidden now in the growing darkness, Taza Redhawk made his own promise to the spirit of his friend. He would watch over her, this woman of quiet strength and terrible sorrow, not because she was weak, but because Thomas had been right. She was stronger than she knew. And in this land that demanded everything and forgave nothing, strength recognized strength, regardless of the color of skin or the divide of cultures. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, cold and distant as the hearts of the townspeople who had already forgotten the widow walking alone into the night. But the land remembered, and the wind carried whispers of change, of boundaries about to be crossed and conventions about to be shattered. In the great drama of the frontier, a new act was about to begin, written in dust and blood and the indomitable will to survive. The wooden door creaked on its hinges as Sarah pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty house like a mournful bell. Dust motes danced in the shaft of moonlight that sliced through the window, illuminating the sparse interior of the cabin Thomas had built with his own hands. Every board, every nail held his memory, and the silence was deafening. She moved mechanically, setting the Bible on the rough-hewn table, her movements stirring the stale air. The house felt smaller somehow, as if Thomas's absence had collapsed the very walls inward. His coffee cup still sat by the stove, a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. His work boots stood by the door, caked with the red mud of their last day together. Sarah couldn't bring herself to move them. Outside, the night pressed against the windows like a living thing. The landscape stretched endlessly, cracked earth spiderwebbing toward the horizon, interrupted only by clusters of prickly pear cactus and the occasional mesquite tree. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, a lonely sound that seemed to mock her isolation. This land that had once felt like freedom now felt like a prison, vast and inescapable. She lit a kerosene lamp with trembling fingers, the warm glow pushing back the darkness, but not the despair. The larder was nearly empty, a few strips of dried beef, some cornmeal, a handful of beans. Thomas had been planning to restock in town after his trading journey. Now, the meager supplies seemed to represent the fragility of her own survival. Sarah sank into Thomas's chair, running her fingers along the arms worn smooth by his hands. How many evenings had they spent here together, planning their future while the sun set over their small plot of land? He'd promised her a real ranch one day, with cattle and horses, maybe even hired hands to help work the land. "We'll build something lasting, Sarah," he'd said, his eyes bright with dreams. "Something our children can be proud of." Children. The word was a knife to her heart. Another dream buried with him in that hillside cemetery. The next morning brought no relief, only the harsh reality of tasks that needed doing despite grief's heavy weight. Sarah forced herself from bed, splashing cold water on her face from the basin. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a stranger, hollow cheeks, dark circles under gray eyes that had lost their light. She pinned up her dark hair with mechanical precision, donned her second-best dress, her best was still the black one from yesterday, and steeled herself for the trip to town. The walk to Redemption Creek took the better part of an hour, following the rutted wagon trail that wound through the scrubland. The sun was already brutal, beating down on her bonneted head like a hammer on an anvil. Lizards scurried across her path, and overhead, buzzards circled lazily, eternal watchers of the desert's harsh justice. Town was bustling with its usual morning activity. Freight wagons rumbled down Main Street, kicking up clouds of dust. The general store's door stood open, releasing the mingled scents of coffee, leather, and tobacco. Men lounged outside the saloon despite the early hour, and women in calico hurried about their errands, baskets over their arms. But as Sarah approached, the normal rhythm stuttered and slowed. Conversations died mid-sentence. Women who had once greeted her warmly now found urgent business in the opposite direction. Men touched their hat brims in the briefest of acknowledgments before turning away. She was a ghost walking among the living, made invisible by association and tragedy. At Morrison's general store, she stood at the counter, waiting while Jake Morrison deliberately served two other customers who had entered after her. When he finally acknowledged her presence, his face was stone. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, the title sounding like an accusation. "What can I do for you?" I need supplies, Sarah said quietly, producing her small purse. Flour, salt pork if you have it. Your credit's no good here. Morrison interrupted, not meeting her eyes. Cash only. Sarah's cheeks burned. Thomas had always maintained good credit, paying promptly after each harvest. Mr. Morrison. You know Thomas always. Thomas is dead, he said bluntly. And there's talk about why. Can't extend credit when I don't know if you'll even be here come next month. Cash only, or nothing. The coins in her purse, saved for emergencies, would barely cover a week's worth of supplies. Sarah counted them out with steady hands, though inside she trembled with humiliation and fear. The other customers watched from the corners of their eyes, their whispers following her like shadows. Heard she's been marked by the Comanche. Mrs. Patterson murmured to her companion. They say one of them has been watching her place. Thomas Whitlock got what comes from treating with savages, replied Mrs. Davis, loud enough for Sarah to hear. And now she's reaping what he sowed. Mark my words, no good will come of it. Sarah gathered her meager purchases, less than half what she'd hoped to buy, and fled the store, but the whispers followed her through town like tumbleweeds on the wind. Widow Whitlock's curse, someone said. Bad luck, that one. Wonder how long before she packs up and leaves. Would be better for everyone. By the time she reached the edge of town, tears blurred her vision, but she wouldn't cry here. Wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She'd survived this long on the frontier. She wouldn't be broken by small-minded gossip and fear. The journey home seemed longer, the packages heavier. The sun had reached its zenith, turning the landscape into a shimmering hell of heat mirages and scorched earth. Sarah's dress clung to her with perspiration, and her throat burned with thirst. She'd forgotten to refill her water at the town well, too eager to escape the judgmental stares. As she crested the final rise before her property, she stopped short. There, in the dust near her front door, were footprints, moccasin prints, distinct from any boot sole. Her heart hammered as she approached slowly, half expecting an ambush. But the house stood empty, nothing disturbed. It was only when she reached the door that she saw it, a bundle wrapped in deerskin, placed carefully on the doorstep. Sarah glanced around, seeing nothing but empty landscape, before kneeling to examine the package. Inside, she found herbs, some she recognized as remedies her grandmother had used, others unknown. There was yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, and sage for purification. At the bottom of the bundle lay a single eagle feather, like the one she'd seen at the cemetery. Sarah's hands trembled as she gathered the gifts. She knew who had left them, though she couldn't fathom why. Taza Redhawk. The name was spoken in town like a curse, associated with raids and stolen cattle, though Sarah had never heard of him actually harming anyone from Redemption Creek. Thomas had mentioned him occasionally, always carefully, aware that his trading relationships with the Comanche were viewed with suspicion. She brought the herbs inside, laying them on the table like evidence of a crime. What did it mean? Why would a Comanche warrior leave medicine at her door? The practical part of her mind noted that several of the herbs were valuable, useful for treating everything from fever to infection. The fearful part wondered if accepting them would further damn her in the town's eyes. As darkness fell, Sarah found herself watching the windows, starting at every sound. The coyotes seemed closer tonight, their yips and howls raising goosebumps on her arms. When a shadow passed by the window, she nearly screamed, but it was only a tumbleweed driven by the night wind. She barricaded the door with Thomas's heavy trunk, loaded his rifle, and placed it within reach. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house, every whistle of wind through the gaps in the walls, sent her heart racing. Was he out there, watching, protecting, waiting for something she couldn't name? Near midnight, she heard it, the soft nicker of a horse, quickly hushed. Sarah crept to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Moonlight illuminated the yard, turning everything silver and shadow. There, near the empty corral, she glimpsed movement, a figure on horseback, still as a statue, facing the house, even in the darkness. She knew it was him. Taza Red Hawk, maintaining his mysterious vigil. Sarah's fingers tightened on the rifle stock, but she didn't raise it. Something in his posture, in the patient way he sat his horse, spoke of guardianship rather than threat. Still, she couldn't understand why. What debt did he owe to Thomas that extended to protecting his widow? She watched until her eyes burned with fatigue, but he never moved, never approached. Finally, exhaustion won, and she stumbled to her bed, the rifle clutched like a talisman. When she woke at dawn, the yard was empty, but fresh moccasin prints circled the house, a protective barrier drawn in dust. On the fence post hung a freshly killed rabbit, cleaned and ready for cooking. Sarah stared at it, torn between gratitude and fear. To accept his help was to acknowledge a connection that the town would never forgive, but to refuse it might mean starvation, especially if Morrison and the others continued to shut her out. She took the rabbit. As she prepared the meat for preservation, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she stood at a crossroads. Behind her lay the safety of conformity, of following the town's unspoken rules about race and propriety. Ahead lay an uncertain path, marked by eagle feathers and acts of inexplicable kindness from a man her world taught her to fear. The desert wind sang through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Sarah had survived one kind of death already. Now she had to decide if she had the courage to survive the living death of complete isolation, or if she would take the hand extended from the shadows, regardless of its color or the price it might demand. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled, its cry echoing off the canyon walls like a challenge. Sarah watched it soar, wild and free, unbounded by the petty constraints of human prejudice. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a stirring that wasn't grief, a tiny spark of defiance, of determination. She would survive this. Somehow, she would survive. The sandstorm struck without warning, transforming the world into a howling chaos of red dust and stinging grit. Sarah had seen the dark wall approaching across the desert, a rolling mountain of earth torn from its bed and flung skyward by winds that could strip paint from wood and flesh from bone. She'd raced to secure what she could, shuttering windows, bringing in the washing, driving her few chickens into their coop, but the storm moved faster than fear. Now, as the wind screamed like 1,000 tortured souls, she fought to hold the barn door closed. The old hinges shrieked in protest, and the wood bucked against her grip like a living thing trying to escape. Her milk cow bellowed in terror, and the old plow horse Thomas had named Moses kicked at his stall, adding to the cacophony. The door jerked violently, tearing from her grasp and slamming back with tremendous force. Sarah cried out as the edge caught her shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into a support beam. Pain exploded through her left arm, and when she tried to push herself up, the limb refused to cooperate. Blood seeped through her torn sleeve where a protruding nail had gouged deep. She struggled to her feet, cradling her injured arm. But the door continued its violent dance. If she couldn't secure it, the wind would tear it completely off, leaving her animals exposed to the storm's fury. Gritting her teeth against the pain, she threw herself at the door again, using her good shoulder as a battering ram. The wood suddenly gave way, not outward as she'd expected, but inward, as if pulled by invisible hands. Sarah tumbled forward into the shocking stillness of the barn's interior, the door slamming shut behind her with definitive finality. For a moment, she lay stunned in the hay, wondering if the wind had somehow created a vacuum that sucked the door closed. Then she saw him. Taza Red Hawk stood by the door, one hand still on the heavy wooden bar he'd just dropped into place. Dust covered him like war paint, turning his dark skin pale, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. He looked exactly as she'd imagined from her glimpses. Tall, lean, with the coiled strength of a man who lived by physical prowess. His long black hair was tied back, revealing a face that might have been carved from the same stone as the canyon walls. Sarah scrambled backward, her good hand searching for anything that might serve as a weapon. Her fingers closed on a pitchfork handle, and she raised it threateningly. though the movement sent fresh waves of agony through her injured arm. "Stay back," she gasped, though her voice came out more plea than command. Taza held up both hands, palms out in the universal gesture of peace. When he spoke, his English carried the careful precision of a learned language. Each word weighed before release. "You are hurt. The storm will last hours. You will bleed much if not tended." "I said stay back." Sarah pressed herself against the stall gate, the pitchfork wavering in her grip. Moses snorted and stamped, sensing her fear. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the dusty space. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the barn, a different kind of tension crackled. Finally, Taza moved, not toward her, but to his pack near the door. He pulled out a familiar bundle of herbs and cloth, then sat cross-legged on the floor, placing the supplies between them like a peace offering. "I knew your husband," he said quietly. Thomas Whitlock was friend, good man, spoke of you often. The mention of Thomas's name hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Don't you speak his name," she whispered. "You have no right." "I have every right." His voice carried quiet authority. "We hunted together, shared fire, shared stories. He saved my life once. When Bear attacked, I saved his when flash flood came." Taza's eyes never left hers. "He asked me to watch for you if something happened. Said you were strong but would not know how strong until tested." Sarah's grip on the pitchfork loosened slightly. Thomas had never mentioned saving anyone from a bear, but then he'd been careful about discussing his interactions with the Comanche. He asked you?" "Last time we met, 2 weeks before." Taza's jaw tightened. "I warned him about the raids, told him to take different trail. He was stubborn, said he had promises to keep in town. The supplies." Sarah breathed. "He promised Mrs. Garrett medicine for her baby's cough." "Yes, Thomas Whitlock kept promises, even when keeping them was dangerous." Taza gestured to her bleeding arm. "Now you bleed while we talk. Will you let me help? Or will you faint from blood loss and leave me to explain to your husband's spirit why I let his wife die from pride?" Despite everything, Sarah felt her lips twitch in what might have been the ghost of a smile. It sounded exactly like something Thomas would say, cutting through pretense with practical truth. Slowly, she lowered the pitchfork. "If you try anything, if I meant harm, would I announce myself? Would I leave gifts at your door?" Taza shook his head. "I could have entered your house any night. Instead, I leave rabbit and medicine. Very poor villain." "Yes?" Sarah had to admit the logic. Cautiously, she moved closer, stopping just within reach. Taza remained perfectly still as she settled onto a hay bale, only his eyes tracking her movement. "The arm," he said simply, with her good hand. Sarah struggled to roll up her sleeve, hissing as the fabric pulled at the wound. The gash ran from elbow to wrist, not deep enough to be fatal, but certainly enough to cause serious blood loss. Already, her dress front was stained crimson. Taza worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound with water from his canteen, then applying a poultice of crushed herbs. His hands were gentle but sure, and Sarah found herself studying him as he worked. Up close, she could see the thin scars that marked a warrior's life, one across his jaw, another disappearing into his hairline. His face was younger than she'd expected, perhaps only a few years older than her own 26 years. "This will hurt," he warned before binding the wound tightly with clean cloth. Sarah bit her lip but didn't cry out, even when stars danced at the edges of her vision. "There." He sat back on his heels. "Keep dry. Change binding tomorrow. Use the yarrow I left, makes healing faster, prevents fever." "Thank you," Sarah managed, the words feeling strange on her tongue. She was thanking a Comanche warrior for tending her wounds while a sandstorm raged outside. If the townspeople could see her now. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why are you really doing this? One promise to a dead friend can't be worth the risk you're taking." Taza was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "My people are forced onto reservation land. Soldiers watch always. They say we must become farmers, must forget the old ways. But earth there is bad. Nothing grows. Children go hungry. Elders die of sadness. He paused, staring at his hands. Thomas traded fair, never cheated, never lied, brought medicine when sickness came. Other white men see Comanche and see only enemy. Thomas saw people. Now Thomas is gone, and you suffer for his kindness. This is not justice. The town thinks he was a fool for trusting your people. Town is full of fools who see only what fear shows them. His dark eyes met hers. You fear me now, but you also let me tend your wound. Which is stronger, fear or need to survive? Sarah considered this. I don't know yet. Honest answer, Thomas chose well. The casual mention of their marriage sent an unexpected pang through Sarah's chest. You speak as if you knew me. My Sarah makes the best cornbread in Texas. My Sarah can shoot straight as any man. My Sarah reads books by lamplight until oil runs low. Taza's recitation of Thomas's words was pitch perfect, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. My Sarah is afraid of storms, but stands in them anyway when animals need tending. He told you all that? Men talk by campfire. He talked of you. I talked of... Taza stopped abruptly, his expression closing. Of someone you lost, Sarah guessed softly. My wife. 3 winters passed. Soldier's disease took her. The words were clipped, final. They sat in silence while the storm howled outside. Sarah understood now. He wasn't just keeping a promise to Thomas. He was a widower too. Someone who understood the particular emptiness of reaching for someone no longer there. I'm sorry, she said simply. He nodded once, accepting the sympathy without elaboration. Storm weakens. I should go before... The barn door exploded inward with a crash that made both of them jump. But it wasn't the wind. It was Josiah Crawford, the sheriff's deputy, flanked by 2 other men from town. Their guns were drawn, faces twisted with righteous anger. Step away from her, savage! Crawford snarled, his pistol trained on Taza's chest. Sarah struggled to her feet, placing herself partially between them. Wait, he was helping me. I was injured. Helping! Crawford spat tobacco juice onto the barn floor. Is that what they're calling it now? We tracked him here. Mrs. Whitlock saw him enter your barn. You're lucky we arrived when we did. You don't understand. I understand plenty. This red devil's been sniffing around your property for days. Probably the same bunch that killed your husband. Coming back to finish the job? That's not true. Sarah's voice rose with frustration. He knew Thomas. They were... Friends? Crawford laughed uglily. Your husband's dead. Woman, killed by Indians. And here you are, cozy in a barn with one of them. Makes a man wonder what really happened out on that trail. The implication in his words was clear and ugly. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, anger temporarily overriding fear. How dare you! Enough! Taza had risen slowly, hands visible but ready. His entire bearing had changed, where before he'd been gentle, almost soft-spoken. Now he radiated dangerous capability. I go, no need for more words. You'll go all right. Crawford sneered. Right to a hanging tree. No! Sarah stepped fully in front of Taza now. I won't let you do this. He's done nothing wrong. I invited him in out of the storm. He helped bandage my wound. Look! She held up her injured arm. He saved me from bleeding to death. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Crawford's face reddened. You invited him. Mrs. Whitlock. Are you saying you willingly... I'm saying he showed Christian charity when I needed help. Sarah interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Which is more than I can say for most of the fine citizens of Redemption Creek. Now lower your weapons and get off my property. Your property? Crawford's laugh was harsh. Woman alone can't hold property, not without a man's protection. And consorting with Indians, the law says different, Sarah shot back. This land is mine by legal deed, transferred to my name upon my husband's death. And unless you have evidence of an actual crime, which you don't, you have no authority here. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could feel Taza behind her, coiled and ready. She knew that if violence erupted, he would fight and probably die. outnumbered 3-1. The thought sent unexpected panic through her. Finally! Crawford holstered his weapon, though his expression promised this wasn't over. "You're making a mistake. Mrs. Whitlock, a fatal one. Don't come crying to the town when this animal shows his true nature." "The only animals I see are the ones standing uninvited in my barn," Sarah replied coldly. Crawford's face went purple, but he turned on his heel. "Come on, boys. Let the fool woman learn her lesson the hard way." At the door, he paused. "You've chosen your side, Mrs. Whitlock. Remember that when you need help and find every door in town closed to you." They left, taking their rage and righteousness with them. Sarah stood frozen until the sound of their horses faded into the storm's dying gasps. Then her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Taza hadn't caught her good arm. "You should not have done that," he said quietly. "Now they will make your life harder." "My life is already hard," Sarah replied, surprising herself with a shaky laugh. "At least now I know where I stand." She looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time without fear clouding her vision. His face was concerned, almost gentle, so at odds with the savage Crawford had named him. "You'd better go. They might come back with more men." "Will you be safe?" Sarah thought of the locked doors Crawford had threatened, the isolation that would now be complete. But she also thought of the herbs on her table, the rabbit on her fence post, the careful hands that had tended her wound. "I'll manage," she said. "I always do." Taza studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "No one dared approach the mourning widow," he said softly, "until the fierce Comanche took her hand at the grave." Sarah's breath caught. "What?" "Something Thomas said once, about courage being not the absence of fear, but acting despite it." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You have courage. Sarah Whitlock, your husband saw it. Now I see it too." And then he was gone, vanishing into the settling dust of the storm's aftermath, leaving Sarah alone with her thundering heart and the terrible, wonderful realization that something fundamental had just changed. The line she'd crossed couldn't be uncrossed, for better or worse. She'd chosen a side, not the Comanche side or the white side, but the side of human decency over blind hatred. Outside, the sun was trying to break through the dust clouds, painting the world in shades of amber and gold. Sarah stood in the barn doorway, watching the light transform the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. Her arm throbbed. Her future was uncertain, and she'd just made enemies of the only community she had. But for the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't feel entirely alone. Dawn broke like a whispered promise over the desert, painting the red earth in shades of rose and gold. The storm had scoured the landscape clean, leaving behind air so clear that Sarah could see for miles across the undulating terrain. Every ridge and valley stood in sharp relief, as if the world had been remade overnight. She stood on her porch, coffee cup warming her hands, watching the light creep across the land. Her injured arm ached dully beneath fresh bandages, a constant reminder of yesterday's events. The confrontation in the barn had set something in motion, like a boulder pushed down a hillside, gathering momentum toward an inevitable crash. The morning held an unusual quality, too quiet, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. No birdsong greeted the sun, no lizard scurried across the rocks. Even the ever-present wind had stilled to nothing. Sarah had lived on the frontier long enough to recognize an omen when she felt one. By mid-morning, she understood why. Dust clouds on the southern horizon announced visitors long before they arrived. Sarah counted at least a dozen riders, far too many for a social call. She loaded Thomas's rifle and placed it within easy reach, though she knew it would be useless against such numbers. The delegation that arrived was a who's who of Redemption Creek's leading citizens. Mayor Nathaniel Hartright led the group, his substantial belly straining against his brocade vest. Behind him rode Judge Solomon Fairweather, the banker Eugene Hutchinson, and most of the town council. Their wives followed in 2 carriages, parasols raised against the climbing sun like shields against impropriety. Sarah met them in her yard, back straight, chin raised, She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of cowering in her own home. "Mrs. Whitlock," the mayor began, not bothering to dismount. "We've come to discuss your situation." "My situation?" Sarah kept her voice level. "I wasn't aware I had one that required such distinguished attention." Judge Fairweather cleared his throat. "Come now, Mrs. Whitlock." Deputy Crawford made his report. "You were found in compromising circumstances with a known hostile." "I was found injured and receiving medical assistance during a storm," Sarah corrected. "Unless Christian charity has been outlawed in Redemption Creek." "Don't play coy," snapped Mrs. Hutchinson from her carriage. "You know perfectly well what this looks like. A widow, alone with a savage." "A man," Sarah interrupted. "A man who showed me more kindness than any of you have since my husband's death." The group exchanged meaningful glances. Mayor Hartright shifted in his saddle. "Mrs. Whitlock, we've come here in the spirit of community concern. Your husband's death was tragic, yes, but your recent behavior suggests you may not be thinking clearly. My thinking is perfectly clear." "Is it?" The judge leaned forward. "Clear enough to realize that consorting with hostiles could be construed as treason, that harboring enemies of the United States government is a federal offense." Sarah felt a chill despite the warming day. "He's not an enemy. He's done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" Eugene Hutchinson's voice dripped condescension. "The Comanche have been raiding settlements for decades, murdering innocent families, stealing livestock. And you defend one of them?" "I defend a man who helped me," Sarah said firmly, "who has shown me nothing but kindness. Can any of you say the same?" The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. "Finally, Mrs." Patterson spoke up from the second carriage. "Sarah, dear, we're trying to help you. You're clearly overwrought with grief. Perhaps it would be best if you came to stay in town for a while, with a proper family. The Weatherbys have offered to take you in." "As what?" Sarah asked. "A charity case? An unpaid servant?" "As a guest, Mrs." Patterson insisted, though her eyes said otherwise. "Until you're yourself again." "I am myself," Sarah replied. "And I'm staying on my land." Mayor Hartright's face darkened. "Then you leave us no choice." "As of this morning, you are no longer welcome in Redemption Creek. No merchant will serve you. No neighbor will aid you. You've chosen to stand with the enemies of civilization, and you'll bear the consequences." "You're banishing me?" Sarah couldn't quite hide her disbelief. "For accepting medical help? For betraying your race?" Judge Fairweather intoned solemnly. "For spitting on your husband's memory by taking up with his killers?" "Taza didn't kill Thomas," the words burst out before Sarah could stop them. "He tried to warn him. They were friends." The laughter that erupted from the group was ugly and disbelieving. "Friends?" Crawford, who had remained silent until now, spat into the dust. "Your husband was a fool, and now we see you're no better. Maybe you deserve each other, you and your red savage." "That's enough." Mayor Hartright raised a hand. "We've said our piece. Mrs. Whitlock, you have 1 week to reconsider. Come to town, accept the Weatherbys' hospitality, and denounce any association with the Comanche, or remain here and face complete isolation. The choice is yours." The delegation turned to leave, but Mrs. Hutchinson couldn't resist a parting shot. "Your poor mother would be spinning in her grave. Sarah Whitlock. Thank the Lord she didn't live to see what you've become." Sarah stood frozen as they departed, their dust cloud lingering like an accusation. Complete isolation. No supplies, no help, no human contact. On the frontier, it was as good as a death sentence. She was still standing there when the sun reached its zenith, baking the earth into hardpan. The enormity of what had just happened slowly sank in. She was now truly alone. Cut off from the only community within 100 miles, her meager supplies would last perhaps 2 weeks if she was careful. Then what? She couldn't hunt large game alone. Her vegetable garden was struggling in the drought. The nearest town beyond Redemption Creek was 5 days' ride through hostile territory. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Think," she commanded herself. "What would Thomas do? He'd find a way, she said aloud, her voice strange in the empty yard. He always found a way. She spent the afternoon taking inventory. The root cellar held some preserved vegetables, a few jars of fruit, dried beans. The smokehouse had the remnants of the rabbit Taza had left, plus some salt pork. The well still produced water, though it was running lower each day. If she was extremely careful, she might stretch her supplies to 3 weeks. As the sun began its descent, painting long shadows across the desert floor, Sarah found herself scanning the horizon. Would he come back? After yesterday's confrontation, it would be dangerous for Taza to approach her property. Crawford and his men were probably watching, waiting for an excuse to act on their threats. She was refilling the water trough when she saw it, a small figure moving against the sunset, too deliberate to be wildlife. Sarah shaded her eyes, squinting into the glare. Not a rider, but someone on foot, moving with the steady pace of one who knew the desert's ways. As the figure drew closer, Sarah realized with a start that it was a woman, a native woman, dressed in traditional clothing, carrying a large basket. She moved with quiet dignity, neither hurrying nor hesitating, as if she had every right to be walking across this contested land. Sarah met her at the property line. Rifle in hand but pointed at the ground, the woman appeared to be in her middle years, with silver threading through her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. She stopped a respectful distance away and spoke in accented but clear English. "You are the widow Whitlock?" Sarah nodded, unsure what to expect. "I am Maria Windwalker. Taza sent me." The woman's dark eyes studied Sarah with frank assessment. "He says you need to learn things, how to find water when well runs dry, how to make bread from mesquite pods, how to trap small game, things to survive alone. He sent you to teach me?" Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "Men." Maria shrugged with universal female exasperation. "They think fighting is hard and teaching is easy. They know nothing, but Taza is my cousin's son, and he asks little, so I come." She stepped closer, seemingly unimpressed by the rifle. "You hold that gun like you know how to use it. Good, but gun does not fill empty belly or find hidden spring. You want to learn, or you want to stand here until sun sets?" Despite everything, Sarah found herself almost smiling. "I want to learn." Smart woman, maybe smarter than people say. Maria walked past her toward the house. First lesson, never waste daylight talking when you could be working. For the next several hours, Maria proved to be a relentless but effective teacher. She showed Sarah how to read the landscape for signs of underground water, how to identify edible plants that most whites overlooked, how to set snares that would catch rabbits and ground squirrels. Her hands were quick and sure, her explanations practical rather than mystical. "White people think desert is empty," Maria said as she demonstrated how to process prickly pear cactus. "But desert is full of food if you know how to look. My grandmother lived through 3 droughts, never went hungry." As they worked, Sarah found herself warming to the older woman's no-nonsense approach. Maria didn't pity her or judge her, simply treated her as a student who needed to learn quickly. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked as they gathered mesquite pods in the dying light. "Your people have no reason to care what happens to one white widow." Maria was quiet for a moment, selecting her words. "Taza says you stood between him and white men's guns. This is not small thing. Among my people, such debt must be repaid." "It wasn't about debt," Sarah protested. "It was about what was right." "Yes." Maria smiled for the first time. "This is why I come. Not for debt, but because woman who sees right instead of white or red is rare, worth teaching." As darkness approached, Maria prepared to leave. She pressed a small leather pouch into Sarah's hands. "Seeds," she explained. "Plants that grow with little water. Plant them before next rain." "Will I see you again?" Maria glanced toward the horizon where the last light was fading. "Perhaps, if white men don't shoot me for walking on their land." Her tone was matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "Taza watches. He cannot come close now. Too dangerous. But he watches. Tell him." Sarah paused, unsure what message to send. "Tell him thank you." Maria studied her with those knowing eyes. "I tell him you are stronger than you know. This is better than thanks." After Maria left, Sarah stood in her doorway, watching the stars emerge in the vast sky. The desert that had seemed so empty and hostile this morning now held secrets she was beginning to understand. She thought of the seeds in her hand, the knowledge in her head, the strange alliance forming across cultural lines that were supposed to be impermeable. In the distance, a coyote howled, and its pack answered. The sound no longer seemed mournful to Sarah, but rather defiant, creatures surviving against all odds in a harsh land, calling to each other across the darkness. She was part of that now, whether the town accepted it or not, part of the struggle, the defiance, the unlikely connections that formed when survival mattered more than the color of helping hands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Her supplies were still limited, the town's boycott still in effect, but tonight, with her belly full of mesquite flour cakes and her mind full of new knowledge, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death: hope. She touched the bandage on her arm where Taza had tended her wound. It was healing cleanly, without infection, just as he'd promised. Everything he'd promised had come to pass: the protection, the teaching, the chance to survive outside the narrow confines of the town's expectations. No one dared approach the mourning widow, she whispered to the stars, remembering his words. But someone had dared, and in doing so, had shown her that the boundaries between peoples were not as fixed as she'd been taught. In this land of extremes, perhaps extreme connections were not only possible but necessary. A shadow moved against the northern ridge, a mounted figure, motionless and watching. Sarah raised her hand in acknowledgement, knowing somehow that he would see it. Taza, maintaining his distant vigil, honoring his promise to a dead friend while navigating the dangerous ground between two worlds. She went inside and barred the door, but for the first time since Thomas's death, it wasn't fear that motivated her. It was simple prudence, the kind Maria had taught her. Tomorrow she would plant the seeds, set the snares, practice finding water in dry places. Tomorrow she would continue becoming whoever she was meant to be in this harsh and beautiful land. Tonight, she would sleep knowing she was not truly alone. Somewhere in the darkness, unexpected allies kept watch, and that, in this unforgiving place, was its own kind of miracle. The full moon hung like a silver dollar in the cloudless sky, transforming the desert into an ethereal landscape of silver shadows and blue-white sand. Sarah sat outside her small house, wrapped in a worn blanket, unable to sleep despite the day's exhaustion. The night sounds of the prairie, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whisper of wind through dry grass, had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. It had been 3 weeks since the town's ultimatum, 3 weeks of complete isolation from white society, yet she had survived, even begun to thrive in small ways. Maria's teachings had proved invaluable. The snares provided steady meat, the desert plants supplemented her dwindling stores, and she'd found a new seep of water by following the signs the older woman had shown her. But tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense of waiting that made her skin prickle with awareness. She'd learned to trust these instincts. The desert had its own language, and she was finally beginning to understand it. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her reach for the rifle beside her chair. But something in the rhythm, unhurried, deliberate, made her pause. A single rider emerged from the shadows between the mesas, moving with the easy grace of one who belonged to the night. Taza. He dismounted at the edge of her property, leaving his paint horse ground-tied. In the moonlight, she could see he wore traditional dress, buckskin leggings, a bone breastplate, his hair loose except for 2 small braids framing his face. He looked like something from another time, another world. Yet, when he spoke, his voice carried the same quiet dignity she remembered. "The moon is full," he said simply. "Good night for talking." Sarah found herself standing, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "Is it safe for you to be here?" Crawford's men watched the roads, not the old paths, They see only what they expect to see. He moved closer, stopping just outside what would be considered proper distance. You are well, Maria says you learn quickly. She's a good teacher. Sarah gestured to the rough bench Thomas had built. Will you sit? They settled on opposite ends of the bench, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. For a long moment, neither spoke, content to exist in the strange peace of the desert night. Finally, Taza broke the silence. I must tell you about Thomas, about the day he died. Sarah's chest tightened. You don't have to. I do. His voice carried the weight of carried guilt. You deserve truth, not town gossip. He stared out at the moonlit landscape. Thomas and I were to meet that morning. Regular trade, his ammunition for our buffalo hides. But I had dream. Bad dream. Soldiers on the trail. Blood in the dust. I sent warning, told him to wait, take different path. But he didn't. No, he had promised to keep medicine for sick child. Taza's hands clenched on his knees. I should have ridden to meet him, turned him back. But my people needed me. Raiders from another band were threatening our camp. I chose my people over my friend. Sarah absorbed this, feeling the weight of his guilt mixing with her own. It wasn't your fault. Thomas made his choice. Choice? Yes. But choices have consequences. His death, your suffering, these are consequences of choices. Mine, his, others. He turned to look at her directly. Why did you stand between me and those guns? The question she'd been asking herself for weeks. Sarah considered her words carefully. Because I saw a man, not an enemy. Because hate and fear had already taken too much. Because... She paused, searching for truth. Because something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like across a divide. Recognition. Taza repeated softly. Yes, this I understand. He reached into a pouch at his side, withdrawing something small. In the moonlight, Sarah saw it was a carved piece of turquoise, a horse in full gallop. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each line flowing into the next with a natural grace. I made this for my wife, he said, placing it on the bench between them. She loved horses, loved to ride fast across open land. Said it was like flying. His voice roughened. After she died, I could not look at it. Too much pain, but pain fades. Memory remains. Now I give to you. I can't. You can. You must. He pushed it closer to her. Not gift of man to woman. Gift of one who grieves to another who understands. Token of recognition. Sarah picked up the small carving, feeling its smooth weight in her palm. Tell me about her. For the first time since she'd known him, Taza smiled, a real smile that transformed his stern features. Her name was Ayayana, Eternal Bloom. Good name for her. She was like desert flower, beautiful and strong, blooming where others saw only harsh ground. His voice took on the rhythm of storytelling. First time I saw her, she was racing her brother across the plains. Her horse stumbled, threw her into cactus patch. She pulled thorns from her arms, climbed back on horse. One race anyway. I knew then she was one I would marry. She sounds wonderful. She was light where I was shadow, laughter where I was silence. When the spotted sickness came to our camp, I begged her to leave, go to her sister's family. She refused, said her place was with our people, helping sick, bringing comfort. His smile faded. She died holding child whose mother had already passed, singing lullaby until her voice gave out. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, understanding flooding through her. She died being who she was. Yes, as Thomas died being who he was, this is good death, though hard for those left behind. They sat in companionable silence, two souls who had loved and lost, finding comfort in shared understanding. The moon continued its arc across the sky, and Sarah became aware of how natural this felt, sitting with this man who her world said should be her enemy, finding more honesty and connection than she'd experienced in months of proper social calls. Your people, she ventured. Do they know you come here? Some know, not all approve. My uncle says I chase ghosts. Dishonor tradition by helping white woman. Others say debt must be paid, honor satisfied. He shrugged. I stopped caring what others say when Ayanna died. Now I do what feels right in here. He touched his chest. And this feels right? Being here? He was quiet so long she wondered if he'd answer. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. First time, it was duty, promised a friend. Then it was debt. You stood for me. I stand for you, now. He looked at her directly, and Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his dark eyes. Now it is choice. My choice. The weight of his words settled between them like a third presence. Sarah understood what he was saying, what he wasn't saying. The same recognition she'd felt was reflected in his eyes. Two damaged souls finding unexpected solace in each other's company. The town will never accept this, she said softly. Whatever this is, town does not accept you now. What changes? And your people? My people survive by adapting. Some remember when we traded freely with all, before fear and hate poisoned the well. They will understand. In time. Others. He shrugged again. I am already outsider for befriending whites. What is one step more? Sarah stood, suddenly restless, pacing to the edge of the porch. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing, like Sarah Whitlock died with Thomas, and I don't know who's taking her place. Taza rose too, moving to stand beside her, still maintaining careful distance, but close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool night air. Among my people, we believe death is transformation. Caterpillar dies to become butterfly. Seed dies to become tree. Perhaps Sarah Whitlock must die for someone new to be born. And who might that be? Only you can answer. But I think... He paused, choosing words. I think she will be someone who makes her own paths instead of following others. Someone who sees with clear eyes, loves with brave heart. Someone who plants seeds in hard ground and makes them grow. Sarah turned to face him fully. In the moonlight, the planes of his face were silver and shadow, familiar now in a way that should have frightened her but didn't. When you look at me, what do you see? I see strength wrapped in softness, fire banked but not extinguished. I see. He lifted his hand as if to touch her face, then let it fall. I see someone who makes me remember why sunrise is worth watching. The poetry of his words, unexpected from such a warrior, made her heart skip. Taza. Oh, I should go, he said abruptly, stepping back. Moon sets soon. Not safe after. But he didn't move, and neither did she. They stood frozen in the moment, aware they balanced on a precipice. One step forward would change everything. One step back would preserve the careful boundaries they'd maintained. It was Sarah who moved first, reaching out to touch his hand, the briefest contact, fingers brushing fingers. Thank you for everything, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. He turned his hand, catching hers for just a moment. His palm was calloused but gentle, warm against her night-cooled skin. You were always there, just waiting to become. Then he was gone, moving with fluid grace to his horse, mounting in one smooth motion. But before he rode away, he looked back. Next full moon? Next full moon, Sarah agreed, understanding that this was a promise, a commitment to something not yet defined but no longer denied. She watched until he vanished into the landscape, becoming one with shadows and stone. The turquoise horse sat warm in her other hand, carved by love, given in recognition of something deeper than words could express. Inside. She lit a lamp and looked at herself in the small mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the proper town wife who'd stood by her husband's grave weeks ago. This woman had sun-bronzed skin, steady eyes, hands that knew work and survival. This woman had choices to make, paths to choose, boundaries to cross or maintain. Sarah touched the glass, meeting her own gaze. Who are you becoming? She whispered. The mirror had no answers, but somewhere in her chest, where fear and propriety had once ruled, something new stirred. Not love, not yet. That was still too tangled with grief and Thomas's memory. But possibility, recognition, the first green shoots of something that might given time and courage, bloom even in the harsh soil of prejudice and isolation. She placed the turquoise horse on the shelf beside Thomas's photograph. Past and future, memory and possibility, existing side by side, outside. Coyotes sang their ancient songs to the setting moon. Sarah blew out the lamp and prepared for bed, knowing that when the next full moon rose, she would be waiting. The desert had taught her patience. Now it was teaching her something else, that sometimes the most profound connections grew in the most unlikely ground, nurtured by nothing more than recognition, respect, and the tentative hope that two wounded hearts might find a way to heal together. In her dreams that night, she rode a turquoise horse across silver sands, chasing the moon toward a horizon where the lines between worlds blurred and disappeared. And somewhere in that limitless space, she wasn't alone. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after noon, too large to be a single rider, too deliberate to be a natural phenomenon. Sarah shaded her eyes against the harsh sun, counting at least 20 horsemen approaching her property. Her stomach clenched as she recognized the lead rider, Josiah Crawford, his deputy's badge glinting like a threat. She'd known this day would come. The whispers had reached her even in isolation, talk of vigilante justice, of clearing out Indian lovers and race traitors. Maria had warned her during their last lesson, speaking in hushed tones of night riders and burned homesteads. Now, watching the grim-faced men approach, Sarah understood her time had run out. She loaded Thomas's rifle and checked the ammunition. Not enough to hold off 20 men, but perhaps enough to make them think twice. Her hands were steady as she stepped onto the porch, weapon visible but not raised. Crawford reined up just outside her fence line, his men spreading out in a semicircle. She recognized many of them. Pete Morrison from the general store, Carl Brennan, the cattle rancher, even young Billy Hutchinson, barely 18 and trying to look fierce beneath his patchy beard. Good men, she'd once thought. Men who'd tipped their hats to her on Sunday mornings, who'd helped Thomas raise their barn. Now their faces were hard with righteous anger. "Mrs. Whitlock," Crawford called out. "We're here on behalf of the Redemption Creek Citizens Committee." "I wasn't aware we had such a committee," Sarah replied, her voice carrying despite her racing heart. "Formed last week. Unanimous vote." Crawford spat tobacco juice into the dust. "You've been declared a threat to public safety and moral decency. We're here to escort you to town for your own protection." "Protection from what?" "From yourself, woman. From the savages you've been consorting with." His eyes glittered with malice. "We know that red devil's been coming around, Mrs. Brennan saw him here last month, bold as brass under the full moon. It ain't natural, ain't Christian." Sarah lifted her chin. "What's not Christian is a mob threatening a widow on her own land." "Your land?" Crawford laughed. An ugly sound. "You forfeited any claim to Christian property when you took up with heathens. Judge Fairweather's drawn up the papers. Abandonment of moral character. They call it legal grounds to seize the property for redistribution to God-fearing folks." The injustice of it burned in Sarah's throat, but she kept her voice level. "You mean theft? You're trying to steal my home." "We're trying to save your soul," interjected Reverend Cornelius Pike, nudging his horse forward. His black coat and white collar should have represented moral authority, but his eyes held the same fever as the rest. "You've fallen into Satan's snare, child, lying with beasts, turning your back on your own kind." "I've done nothing improper," Sarah interrupted. "Nothing but accept help when you all turned your backs. Where was Christian charity when I was starving? Where was neighborly kindness when I needed supplies?" "Don't you dare," Carl Brennan snarled. "You made your choice. No decent woman would let a savage touch her, tend her wounds, share her company under cover of darkness." The implications in his words were vile, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Your minds are smaller than your hearts, and that's saying something. I won't dignify your filthy suspicions with denial." "Then you admit it." Billy Hutchinson's voice cracked with excitement. "She admits her sin." I admit nothing but this. I've found more humanity in those you call savages than in the entirety of Redemption Creek. Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. Now get off my land. Crawford dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. Can't do that. Mrs. Whitlock. See, we got word your Comanche friend is heading this way. Spotted him 2 hours ago, riding hard from the north. We figure he's coming to collect his white woman, take you back to his heathen tribe. Sarah's heart leaped despite herself. Taza was coming, in broad daylight. It wasn't like him to be careless unless, so we're going to wait. Crawford continued. And when he shows up, we're going to solve 2 problems at once. Remove a threat to public safety and free you from his influence. Permanent-like. The meaning was clear. They intended to kill Taza and likely her as well, claiming it was justified. Sarah's mind raced. She had to warn him. Had to. A cry went up from one of the men. Rider approaching. All heads turned to the north. A lone figure on horseback had crested the ridge, riding at a steady pace despite the waiting danger. Even at this distance, Sarah recognized Taza's distinctive posture, the way he moved as one with his paint horse. He's not even trying to hide, someone muttered. Cocky savage. But Sarah understood. He'd seen the mob from afar, knew what waited, and came anyway. This wasn't carelessness, it was choice. Honor. The kind of courage that faced danger head-on rather than skulking in shadows. Get inside, Mrs. Whitlock, Crawford ordered, drawing his weapon. This is about to get unpleasant. No. The word came out stronger than she'd intended, powered by something deeper than fear. Sarah stepped off the porch, rifle raised. I won't let you murder him. Murder? Reverend Pike's voice rose to preaching pitch. It's not murder to put down a dangerous animal, to protect Christian virtue from defilement. The only animals I see are the ones hiding behind mob justice. Sarah shot back. She moved to position herself between the approaching rider and the mob. You'll have to shoot through me. You'd die for a savage? Crawford seemed genuinely puzzled. You'd throw away your life, your eternal soul, for one of them? Sarah thought of Thomas, of his dreams of a West where different peoples could trade and live in peace. She thought of Taza's quiet dignity, of the turquoise horse that sat on her shelf, of 2 grieving souls finding unexpected comfort. She thought of Maria's practical wisdom, of learning to read the desert's secrets, of becoming someone she'd never imagined she could be. I'd die for justice, she said simply. For the right of any man to travel freely without being murdered for the color of his skin. For the principles this country claims to stand for but so rarely honors. Yes, Mr. Crawford, I'd die for that. Taza was close enough now that she could see his face, calm, resolved, showing no fear as he approached certain death. He dressed formally, she noticed, in the manner of a warrior facing his final battle. Eagle feathers in his hair, war paint across his cheeks, weapons visible but not drawn. He stopped just outside rifle range, sitting tall on his horse. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the space. I come in peace to speak with the widow Whitlock. I bring news of danger to all. Apache war party moving south, likely to attack settlements within days. Information that could save lives, if men are wise enough to listen. Liar! Billy Hutchinson's voice was shrill. It's a trick. But some of the men exchanged uneasy glances. Apache raids were a constant threat. An accurate warning could mean the difference between life and death. Let him speak, Sarah called out, still standing between the mob and Taza. What harm in hearing words, or are you so eager for blood you'd risk your own families? Crawford hesitated, his authority wavering. In that moment of uncertainty, Taza dismounted, moving with deliberate slowness to show his peaceful intent. 3 days ago, our scouts found signs. 50 warriors, maybe more, moving through Skeleton Canyon. War paint, not hunting party. They struck Mexican settlement already. Now turn north. Your town lies in their path. Why should we believe you? Crawford demanded, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Believe or not, your choice. I come because Thomas Whitlock would want his neighbors warned. even neighbors who show no honor. Taza's gaze found Sarah, and because his widow deserves chance to defend what is hers, the mob stirred uneasily. Apache raids were no joke, and Skeleton Canyon was a known route for war parties. If Taza spoke truth and they ignored the warning, it's still a trick, Crawford insisted. But doubt had crept into his voice. Probably his own people planning to attack while we're distracted. My people are 2 days north, moving away from trouble, not toward... Taza's voice carried quiet authority. I ride alone, against wisdom of elders, to bring warning. This is debt to Thomas Whitlock, who warned my people of cavalry movements last winter, saved many lives. This was news to Sarah, another secret kindness of her husband's that he'd never mentioned. The crowd, too, seemed taken aback. Carl Brennan cleared his throat. If there's Apache coming, we need to get back, warn the town, prepare defenses. After we finish here. Crawford snapped, but his support was fracturing. Sarah seized the moment. You have a choice, gentlemen. Waste time with your hatred. Maybe let your families die for your pride, or take the warning, prepare your defenses, protect what actually matters. She's right, one of the men said. Sarah recognized him as Jim Coleman, the schoolmarm's husband. My Martha's alone with the children, if there's even a chance. The mob began to dissolve, fear overcoming bloodlust. Men who'd come to deliver frontier justice now thought of their own vulnerabilities, their undefended homes and families. This isn't over, Crawford snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. When the Apache threat passes, we'll be back, and next time, you won't have convenient warnings to hide behind. They left in a cloud of dust and confusion, spurring their horses toward town. Only Crawford looked back, his face a mask of frustrated rage. Sarah knew he'd make good on his threat, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. She lowered the rifle, her arms suddenly trembling with delayed reaction. Taza approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. The Apache? She asked quietly. Real. Moving south, as I said. Your town will survive if they prepare. He studied her face. You would have died for me. You rode into certain death to warn people who hate you. This is different. I am warrior, trained for death. You are... I am who I choose to be. Sarah interrupted. And I choose to stand for what's right, regardless of the cost. They stood facing each other as the sun tracked lower in the sky. Something had shifted between them, deepened beyond recognition or cautious friendship. Sarah had publicly declared herself, chosen a side in the sight of her entire community. There was no going back now. They will return. Taza said, Crawford speaks truth. When Apache threat passes, mob will remember their anger. Then I'll face them again. Not alone. His voice was firm. My people will give you sanctuary if needed. This I promise. Sarah thought of leaving her home, Thomas's grave, everything she'd built. But she also thought of the alternative, eventual murder or forced marriage to someone appropriate to save her reputation. I may have to accept that offer. It would be... He paused, searching for words. Good to have you near. The admission hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Sarah felt her heart skip, recognizing the moment for what it was. A door opening to possibilities she'd never imagined. A dust devil swirled across the yard, and in the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Change was coming in more ways than one. Sarah made her choice, stepping forward to place her hand on Taza's arm. Thank you for the warning, for everything. He covered her hand with his, the touch gentle but significant. No thanks needed between us, not anymore. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together, two people from different worlds, united by loss, respect, and something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. The future stretched uncertain before them, full of danger and prejudice and impossible choices. But for this moment, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, they were simply two souls who had found each other across an impossible divide. And that, Sarah thought, was its own kind of miracle, as rare and precious as rain in the desert. and just as likely to make impossible things bloom. The gunfire erupted just as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the mesa. Sarah had been drawing water from the well when she heard the first shot, a sharp crack that sent her diving for cover behind the stone wall. More shots followed, muzzle flashes lighting up the gathering darkness like deadly fireflies. "Inside, now!" Taza's voice cut through the chaos. He'd been checking the perimeter defenses when Crawford's men struck, earlier than either of them had anticipated. The Apache threat had passed 3 days ago, the war party veering east toward easier targets. Sarah had known the mob would return, but she'd hoped for more time. She scrambled toward the house, bullets whining overhead. A ricochet sparked off the well's metal rim, showering her with stone fragments. 20 feet to the door, it might as well have been 20 miles. Taza appeared from nowhere, moving low and fast. He grabbed her arm, hauling her behind an overturned wagon Thomas had been meaning to repair. Wood splintered as bullets found their mark. "How many?" Sarah gasped, fumbling for the pistol at her hip. "Dozen, maybe more. Surrounded the house." His face was grim in the twilight. Crawford learned from last time. No speeches, no warning. A volley of shots peppered their shelter. Sarah heard glass breaking, her windows, the few she'd managed to salvage and install with such pride. Anger flared hot in her chest, burning away fear. "The rifle's inside," she said. "Extra ammunition too. Too far. They have position." Taza peered around the wagon's edge, jerking back as a bullet gouged the wood where his head had been. "Wait for full dark. Then we move." But Crawford's men had thought of that too. Torches flared to life around the property's perimeter, throwing dancing shadows and robbing them of darkness's cover. Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't meant to be an arrest or even a lynching. It was an execution. "Sarah Whitlock!" Crawford's voice boomed across the yard. "You were warned. Come out now, alone, and we might show mercy. Make us dig you out, and you'll burn with your savage. Burn." Sarah's eyes went to her house, her shelter, repository of all her memories with Thomas. They'd torch it without hesitation, destroying everything to make their point. "I need to get inside," she said urgently. "Thomas's papers, his photograph. Things can be replaced. You cannot—" Taza's hand found hers, squeezing briefly. "We survive first. Grieve later." He was right, but it still hurt. Everything she'd fought to preserve, about to be reduced to ash and char, all because she'd chosen humanity over hatred. A figure broke from cover near the chicken coop, one of Crawford's men trying to flank them. Taza moved like lightning, his knife leaving his hand in a silver arc. The man cried out and fell, clutching his shoulder. "Non-lethal," Sarah noted, even now, defending their lives. Taza showed restraint the mob wouldn't match. "There, he's armed!" Shouts erupted from multiple directions. The gunfire intensified, forcing them to press flat against the ground. Splinters rained down like wooden snow. Sarah's mind raced. They were pinned, outgunned, with nowhere to run. The desert that had been her salvation stretched empty in all directions. Crossing it under fire would be suicide, but staying meant certain death. "The root cellar," she said suddenly. "Thomas dug it deep, reinforced the walls. If we could reach it—" "Too exposed. They'd cut us down." Taza was checking his weapons. A rifle with limited ammunition. 2 knives. Nothing that could match the mob's firepower. Unless— He fell silent, his expression shifting to one Sarah had never seen, calculating, dangerous, the warrior beneath the gentle man she'd come to know. Unless what? "Unless they have reason to stop shooting." He met her eyes. "Trust me?" Before she could answer, he was moving, not toward cover, but out into the open, standing tall despite the bullets cutting the air around him. Sarah's heart stopped. "Crawford!" Taza's voice carried the authority of generations of war chiefs. "You want me, not her. I surrender, but only to you, man to man. You have courage for that? Or do you only fight from shadows like coward?" The shooting stuttered, slowed, stopped. Sarah could practically feel the mob's confusion. This wasn't the script they'd expected. Crawford emerged from behind the barn, pistol drawn but pointed at the ground. His face was flushed with drink and adrenaline. "Surrender? You expect me to believe that? I expect nothing from man who brings dozen guns against one woman." Taza slowly raised his hands. "But Sarah Whitlock is innocent. Your quarrel is with me. Let her go, and I come quietly." "No." Sarah started to rise, but Taza's sharp gesture stopped her. "She's far from innocent." Crawford spat. "Race traitor, Indian lover, white woman grieving husband. Nothing more. I forced my presence. Used her loneliness. She is victim, not criminal." Each word was calculated, playing to the mob's prejudices. Sarah understood his strategy even as it sickened her, painting her as weak, manipulated, to save her life. "Taza, don't," she began, but he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Take me. Tell your town you saved her from savage influence. Be hero." His voice dropped, became mocking. "Or continue hiding behind numbers like frightened child." Crawford's face darkened. The insult to his courage, delivered in front of his men, couldn't go unanswered. "Billy, Cole, take the woman. Savage wants to surrender. We'll accommodate him." Two men approached Sarah's position cautiously. She could have fought, maybe taken one down before they overpowered her. Instead, she let them pull her to her feet, playing the part Taza had written for her. Her eyes found his across the torchlit yard, trying to convey everything she couldn't say. "I understand. I'll find a way. Don't let them kill you." Something flickered in his expression, warmth, regret, maybe something deeper. Then his face became stone as Crawford approached with rope. "On your knees, savage." Taza complied with dignity and tact, even kneeling. He somehow looked more noble than the men surrounding him. Crawford bound his hands with unnecessary roughness, jerking the knots tight enough to cut off circulation. "Got you now," Crawford muttered. "Should have stayed with your own kind." "Yes," Taza agreed quietly. "Should have stayed away from those who teach only hate." The blow came fast, Crawford's pistol butt catching Taza across the temple. He swayed but didn't fall, blood trickling down his face. Sarah bit her lip hard enough to taste copper, forcing herself to remain passive. "Take him to the barn," Crawford ordered. "We'll deal with him proper-like." As they dragged Taza away, Crawford turned to Sarah. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "As for you, Mrs. Whitlock, you're coming back to town. The women will take charge of you, teach you proper behavior again. Maybe in time, you'll be fit for decent society. And if I refuse, then you'll hang beside your savage." His smile was cold. "Choice is yours." No choice at all. Sarah let them lead her to a horse, her mind already working on escape plans. She'd play their game for now, the reformed woman learning the error of her ways, but she'd find a way to free Taza, even if it cost everything. As they prepared to ride out, orange light bloomed against the night sky. Sarah turned to see her house engulfed in flames, the dry wood catching like tinder. Everything, Thomas's books, their few pieces of furniture, the quilt her mother had made, consumed in minutes. But strangely, watching her old life burn, Sarah felt something like liberation. The woman who'd lived in that house, who'd tried to fit into Redemption Creek's narrow mold, was truly dead now. What emerged from these ashes would be someone entirely new. The ride to town passed in a blur of darkness and bitter thoughts. Taza's horse was tied to Crawford's saddle, the warrior himself forced to walk, hands bound, surrounded by mounted men with guns. He moved steadily despite what must be exhaustion and pain. Never stumbling, never showing weakness, the town was eerily quiet when they arrived. Most citizens behind locked doors, but Sarah saw curtains twitch, faces peer from windows. By morning, everyone would know. The scandal would be complete. They locked Taza in the jail's single cell, a stone box barely large enough for a man to lie down. Sarah was delivered to the Weatherby house, where Mrs. Constance Weatherby waited with pursed lips and righteous disapproval. "You'll stay in the attic room," she announced, leading Sarah up narrow stairs. "No visitors, no going out. Meals will be brought. You'll read the Bible and contemplate your sins until you're ready to rejoin Christian society. The room was small and stuffy, containing only a narrow bed and a chair. The single window was nailed shut, a prison in all but name. "My clothes," Sarah began. "Burned with your house, I imagine. You'll wear what we provide." Mrs. Weatherby's smile was sharp. Proper attire for a repentant woman. When the door locked behind her, Sarah sank onto the bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices from below, planning Taza's trial, discussing her rehabilitation. They meant to break her will, reshape her into their image of propriety. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Sarah went to the window, testing the boards. Solid, but the wood around the nails was old, dry. With time and the right tool, she could work them loose. The drop to the ground was manageable. She'd climbed from higher places chasing Thomas's escaped chickens. First, she needed information. How long before the trial? Where were they keeping Taza exactly? Who might be sympathetic? Not everyone in town had joined Crawford's mob. There had to be some who disagreed with frontier justice, even if they were too frightened to speak out. A soft knock interrupted her planning. The door opened to reveal Alice Coleman, the schoolmarm's daughter, barely 16, with gentle eyes and nervous hands. She carried a tray of food. "Mrs. Whitlock," she whispered, glancing back to ensure they were alone. "I'm sorry. What they're doing isn't right." Sarah studied the girl. "Your mother agrees with them." "Mother's scared. We all are. But being scared doesn't make it right." Alice set the tray down, then pulled something from her apron, a small knife, the kind used for whittling. "Thought you might need this for cutting your meat." Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them. "Thank you, Alice." Sarah palmed the knife. "Your kindness won't be forgotten." "They plan to try him tomorrow. Judge Fairweather's already decided the verdict." Alice's voice dropped even lower. "But there's talk among some folks. Not everyone agrees with Crawford. Mr. Martinez from the livery, Doc Brennan, even Reverend Pike's wife. They think this has gone too far." Hope sparked in Sarah's chest. "Would they help?" "I don't know. Maybe, if someone gave them courage." Alice moved toward the door, then paused. "That man, Taza, he saved my little brother once. Found him lost in the desert. Brought him home. Never told anyone it was him, but I saw..." Jamie described the paint horse. Then she was gone, leaving Sarah alone with new knowledge and a tool for escape. She went to work on the window boards immediately, carefully prying at the old wood. Hours passed, splinters embedding in her fingers. But finally, one board loosened. Through the gap, she could see the jail 2 streets over. A single light burned in the sheriff's office. One guard, maybe 2. Possible, if she could rally help. Near midnight, she heard commotion outside. Horses shouted orders, pressing her face to the gap. She saw riders heading out of town. Apache sign had been spotted. Crawford leading a patrol to investigate. The jail would be minimally guarded. It was now or never. Sarah worked frantically on the remaining boards. When the opening was large enough, she squeezed through, holding her breath. The drop jarred her ankles, but she stayed on her feet. Freedom, moving through shadows. She made her way toward the jail. But she wasn't alone. Other figures moved in the darkness. Alice Coleman, Doc Brennan, the Mexican livery owner Martinez, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Pike, the Reverend's wife. "We can't let them hang him." "Mrs." Pike whispered, her usual severity replaced by determination. "What would Jesus do? Not this, never this." They converged on the jail like ghosts. The single guard, half asleep and drunk, never saw Doc Brennan's fist coming. They retrieved the keys, and Sarah rushed to Taza's cell. He was sitting against the wall, face bloody but eyes alert. When he saw her, something like wonder crossed his features. "Sarah, you should not have come." "Shut up," she said, working the lock. "We're getting out of here." "We?" The door swung open. Sarah grabbed his hand, pulled him out. "Did you think I'd leave you After everything, his fingers tightened on hers. Remarkable woman. Remarkably foolish. Doc Brennan corrected. Crawford will be back soon. You need to go, both of you. Martinez had brought horses, including Taza's paint, supplies in the saddlebags. He said, enough to get you to Mexico or wherever you're going. Sarah looked at the small group who'd risked everything to help. Why? Because hate's a poison. Mrs., Pike said simply. Been drinking it so long, we forgot it was killing us. Maybe you two finding each other despite everything. Maybe that's God trying to tell us something. There was no time for lengthy goodbyes. Crawford's patrol could return any moment. Sarah mounted one of the horses, realized she was still wearing the ugly dress Mrs. Weatherby had provided. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the man riding beside her and the open desert ahead. As they galloped out of Redemption Creek, Sarah glanced back once. Her old life was truly dead now. House burned, reputation destroyed, branded an outlaw. But riding beside Taza under a canopy of stars, she felt more alive than she had in years. Where do we go? She asked as the town lights faded behind them. My people will give us sanctuary until we decide. After that, he looked at her, and in the moonlight, she saw possibilities endless as the desert sky. After that, we make our own path. Sarah smiled, remembering his words from weeks ago about becoming someone new. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the grieving widow, the proper town woman, the victim of circumstances. She was simply Sarah, choosing her own destiny, riding toward a future uncertain but infinitely full of promise. Behind them, Redemption Creek slept, unaware that two of its prisoners had become liberators, of themselves and perhaps, in time, of hearts and minds still trapped by fear and hatred. The desert welcomed them, vast and unforgiving but honest in its challenges. And in that honesty, two souls who'd found each other across an impossible divide could build something new, something unprecedented. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient witnesses to yet another human story of love conquering fear, of connection transcending difference, and somewhere in that cosmic dance, Sarah heard Thomas's voice on the wind, gentle and approving. Well done, my love. Well done. They rode on, into the darkness and toward the dawn. The first light of dawn painted the landscape in shades of gold and rose, transforming the harsh desert into something almost ethereal. Sarah and Taza had ridden through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Redemption Creek. Now, as their horses picked their way up a rocky trail, the full weight of their choices settled upon them like the morning dew. There, Taza pointed to a grove of cottonwoods marking a hidden spring. We rest the horses, then continue to my people's camp. As they dismounted, Sarah's legs nearly buckled from exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was fading, leaving behind aches and uncertainties. She was an outlaw now, a fugitive from the only world she'd known. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt strangely free. They tended the horses in companionable silence, then sat by the spring as the sun climbed higher. Sarah cupped the cool water in her hands, washing the last of Redemption Creek's dust from her face. Your people, she said finally. Will they accept me? Taza considered this. Some will see only white woman, enemy by birth. Others will see woman who stood between warrior and bullets, who gave up everything for justice. My grandmother leads our band. She sees with old eyes, beyond skin to spirit. She will judge fairly. And if her judgment goes against me, then we go elsewhere, Mexico, California, somewhere new. He looked at her directly. I will not abandon you, Sarah. This path we walk together now. The simple declaration made her heart skip. Together. Such a small word carrying such enormous weight. They reached the Comanche camp as the sun touched its zenith. It was smaller than Sarah had imagined. Perhaps 30 teepees arranged in a rough circle, with horses grazing nearby and children playing in the dust. At their approach, activity ceased. Women looked up from their work, Men reached reflexively for weapons. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes as they rode in. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, a few outright hostility. She kept her back straight, meeting gazes steadily. She would not show fear, would not give them reason to see her as weak. An elderly woman emerged from the largest teepee. Her face was a map of years, lined and weathered but still strong. Her dark eyes missed nothing as she studied Sarah, taking in every detail from her torn dress to her determined expression. "Grandmother." Taza dismounted and approached with respect. He spoke in Comanche, gesturing to Sarah. The old woman listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. Finally, she spoke in accented but clear English. "So, you are the white woman who makes my grandson forget wisdom of separation." Sarah dismounted, standing tall despite her exhaustion. "I am Sarah Whitlock, and I have forgotten nothing. I've simply chosen to remember different things." The old woman's eyes narrowed. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Sharp tongue. Good. Soft women do not survive here." She circled Sarah slowly, like a buyer examining a horse. "You gave up your people for him. I gave up people who had already given up on me. I chose justice over comfort, truth over lies." Pretty words. We shall see if actions match. She called out in Comanche, and a younger woman appeared. "This is Maria Windwalker. You know her, I think." Sarah's face lit up seeing her teacher. Maria smiled warmly. "I told you she was stronger than she knew. Grandmother, perhaps time will show." The old woman turned back to Sarah. "You will stay in Maria's teepee. Learn our ways. Work like everyone else. No special treatment for Taza's woman." "I'm not," Sarah began, then stopped. What was she to Taza? What was he to her? The simple categories of her old life no longer applied. "You are what you choose to be," the grandmother said, as if reading her thoughts. "But choose carefully. Among my people, choices have consequences that echo through generations." The following days blurred together in a rhythm of work and learning. Sarah helped with traditional women's tasks, preparing hides, gathering plants, tending fires. Her hands, already calloused from frontier life, adapted quickly. Some women remained distant, but others gradually warmed to her, especially when they saw she didn't shirk from hard work. Taza kept respectful distance during the day, but in the evenings, they would walk together along the creek that gave the camp water. These moments became precious, the only time they could speak freely, away from watching eyes. "You adapt well," he said one evening as they watched the sun set. "I've had good teachers." Sarah flexed her fingers, stained now from working with plant dyes. "Your grandmother still watches me like a hawk. She sees something in you. Otherwise, you would not still be here." "What does she see?" Taza was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps what I see. Strength that bends but does not break. Heart that opens despite pain. Spirit that crosses boundaries others fear to approach." Sarah felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "Taza, I know, too soon. Grief still lives in your eyes when you think no one watches." He picked up a smooth stone, skipping it across the water. "But I am patient. The desert teaches patience." That night, Sarah lay in Maria's teepee, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp. Somewhere, a baby cried and was quickly soothed. Men's voices rose and fell in conversation. A dog barked at shadows. It was so different from her silent homestead. Yet loneliness no longer gnawed at her bones. She thought of Thomas, wondered what he would think of this turn her life had taken. Would he understand? Would he approve? In her heart, she thought he might. He'd always been pushing boundaries, building bridges. Perhaps this was simply the logical conclusion of the path he'd started them on. 3 weeks into her stay, everything changed. A lone rider approached the camp. A white man, unarmed, carrying a flag of truce. Sarah recognized him immediately. Judge Solomon Fairweather from Redemption Creek. Her blood ran cold. The judge was brought before the grandmother and the tribal council. Sarah and Taza were summoned as well. She could feel the tension in the camp. warriors ready to defend against treachery. "I come in peace," the judge began, looking older and more tired than Sarah remembered. "To right a wrong, if possible." "Speak," the grandmother commanded. "The town has had time to think since the night these two fled. What Crawford did, what we allowed, it wasn't justice. It was mob rule, fear masquerading as righteousness." He reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a rolled document. "I've brought papers. Official pardon for Sarah Whitlock and the man known as Taza, signed by myself and the territorial governor." Sarah couldn't hide her shock. "Why?" The judge met her eyes. "Because Mrs. Pike started speaking in church about what really happened. Because Doc Brennan refused to treat Crawford after he broke his arm falling off his horse. Said he only helped good people. Because Alice Coleman stood up in the schoolhouse and asked why we punish love but reward hate." He sighed. "Because a town that turns on its own out of fear is already dying." "And Crawford?" Taza asked. "Gone. Took his most loyal followers and headed for California. Said Redemption Creek had gone soft." The judge actually smiled. "Good riddance." The grandmother examined the papers, then passed them to others who could read English. "This changes your situation," she told Sarah. "You could return to your old life." Sarah looked at the document that would restore her citizenship, her property rights, her place in white society. Then she looked at Taza, at Maria, at the children who'd begun to call her Aunt Sarah in Comanche, at the life she'd built here, different from anything she'd imagined, but real and vital and hers. "Judge," she said carefully, "I appreciate what you've done, but I have a question. Does that pardon mean Taza and others could come to town freely, trade without fear, be treated as equals?" The judge's silence was answer enough. "Then I thank you, but I've found my place." She took Taza's hand publicly for the first time. "My old life died with my husband. This is my life now." The judge nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that. In that case..." He produced another document. "The town council voted to deed your property to you both, jointly. If you ever want to return, build something there. You can, together." After the judge left, the camp was buzzing with talk. Some saw it as a trap, others as a sign of changing times. But the grandmother called for silence. "Sarah Whitlock," she said formally, "you have chosen, not from having no options, but from having all options. This is true choice. If my grandson wishes it, and you wish it, I give my blessing." The ceremony was simple, blending traditions from both worlds. Sarah wore a dress Maria had helped her make, decorated with beadwork that told the story of her journey. Taza stood tall in his finest clothing, looking at her like she was the sun after endless night. They spoke vows in both languages, promising not just love, but partnership, respect, and the courage to build something new. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors, they were bound together, not just as husband and wife, but as bridge builders, boundary crossers, proof that love could flourish where hate had tried to rule. Later, standing on a hill overlooking both the Comanche camp and the distant lights of Redemption Creek, Sarah and Taza made their decision. They would return to her property, build a trading post where all were welcome, a place where whites and Comanches could meet in peace, where understanding might grow from the seeds of commerce and common ground. "It won't be easy," Taza warned. "Many will resist. The worthwhile things never are easy." Sarah replied, echoing something Thomas used to say, "But someone has to be first. Someone has to prove it's possible." As stars emerged in the vast Texas sky, they stood together, two people who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances. Ready to face whatever challenges came, the desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. And in that moment, anything seemed achievable. Their story would be told around campfires for generations. How a grieving widow and a Comanche warrior looked past skin color to see souls. How they chose love over fear. How they built something lasting in a land that consumed the weak. A story of the real Wild West, where the greatest courage was not in violence, but in the willingness to see others as human, to reach across divides, To dare to love when the whole world said no. The beginning. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed Sarah and Taza's journey, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect with you. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this tale of love conquering prejudice in the American frontier.